short and sweet. So all week we've been talking about people who like to clench and hold tension in the back of their hip. And when you do that, it rolls the hip outward into external rotation. And so to stop clenching, we need to create more options by rolling the hip inward. But lest you think that the only direction your hip needs to go is inward, internal rotation, we also need strength in external rotation. So really, we need the hip to be strong and mobile in all the directions. So the article that I'm sharing with y'all today is about urinary urgency and frequency. And it certainly stands to reason that when you're experiencing issues with urgency and frequency, that it would be a pelvic floor issue. And in lots of cases, the pelvic floor is definitely a component that we need to consider. But what the research article found is that in people who have urgency and frequency compared to people who don't, pelvic floor muscle strength and endurance were the same. The difference was in hip external rotation and abduction. So external rotation. Okay, so short and sweet anatomy lesson. But now I'm saying, so the article that I'm sharing with y'all today is about urinary urgency and frequency. And it certainly stands to reason that when you're experiencing issues with urgency and frequency, that it would be a pelvic floor issue. And in lots of cases, the pelvic floor is definitely a component that we need to consider. But what the research article found is that in people who have urgency and frequency compared to people who don't, pelvic floor muscle strength and endurance were the same. The difference was in hip external rotation and abduction. So external rotation is rolling out, and abduction is moving your knee out away from midline. So now this brings up a really important point. Well, like you, me, have said, I've been talking about how if you clench, you roll into external rotation. You are tightening these muscles in the back of your hip. But now you're saying you need them to be. But now I'm saying that we need strength into external rotation. So all week, but now I'm saying that we need strength into external rotation. So this is an important point that I want to make sure I get across to you. Just because you clench or you stay in external rotation all the time, tightness does not equal strength. Just like a tight pelvic floor doesn't make it strong. Clenching your glutes doesn't make them strong. Clenching your jaw doesn't make your jaw strong. It creates jaw dysfunction. Headaches, tension, pain, same sort of thing for clenching your hip or clenching your pelvic floor. It doesn't equate to strong, it generally equates to dysfunction. So then the question becomes, well, how do I get strength in external rotation and abduction without clenching? And the answer is you need internal rotation mobility and strength so that you can counterbalance that by the bigger muscles in your hip. Okay, so short and sweet anatomy lesson for you. In the back of your hip, you have several small, deep stabilizing muscles. They have names like obturator internus, gemelli, piriformis, etc. They are little muscles deep in your hip that help you stabilize the ball in the socket. Then, more superficial to that, you have the bigger, more household names like gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, etc. The bigger and more superficial muscles are for moving. The deeper and smaller muscles are for stabilizing. So when you clench, you hold tension in these muscles and you don't allow them to go through their range. As you increase your internal rotation, mobility, and strength, then you can you can create this healthy tug of war between the muscles that do internal rotation and the big powerful ones that we want to do external rotation and abduction. So you need the strength in both directions to create. It's seems to be impossible for me to talk in the time frame that Instagram specifies. But anyway, you want internal rotation, strength, and mobility so that your hip can move through its full range, so that you can create this healthy tug of war that allows your hip to move through full range and to strengthen the external rotators and the abductors that we are talking about in this study today that can change your symptoms and your experience with urgency and frequency. So that's a lot to think about, but please take some time to digest it and let me know what questions you have, because I think that's a really significant concept. I had another really great question in my DMs that I wanted to come on here and share with y'all. So someone asked me as a follow-up from yesterday when we were discussing the position of the ball in the socket, that what is the effect of wearing high heels? And I really wanted to have my pelvis when I was talking to y'all yesterday, but obviously I didn't have it in the woods. So here's the pelvis, here's the hip socket, right? And we want the ball to be relatively centered in the socket. But when you clench and tighten the muscles in the back of your hip, it moves the ball of the femur forward in the socket, and it wears up here and creates more friction and sometimes pain in the front of your hip socket, as opposed to if it's centered and those loads are more evenly distributed. So unless you're actively or consciously trying to do otherwise, most of us in our natural standing posture are either holding tension in the back of our hip or holding tension in the small of our back, or some combination thereof. So if you elevate your heels, it's going to pitch you forward almost like you're walking downhill, and you're going to have to tighten something back here in order to keep yourself upright. This is a pretty extreme lift of my heels, but it makes it easier for you to see on the camera. Obviously, the degree that it pitches you forward gets greater as the lift gets greater. But when I'm pitched forward and I have to engage the back of my body, I'm going to use my go-to technique. So if I'm somebody who holds tension here, I'm going to hold more tension here. If I'm somebody who holds tension in the back of my hip, I'm going to hold more tension in the back of my hip. And if I'm already holding tension there and pushing my hip forward, so if you're already somebody who holds tension in the back of your hip, by pitching yourself forward in the high heels, it's going to cause you to clench more to keep yourself from falling forward. And to meet the increase in instability, you need to use your strategy even more to keep yourself from falling. So the symptoms that you would see from clenching would be then magnified because you're increasing the need to clench by wearing those heels. Now, that isn't to say that you couldn't learn to work against it, but the heels are always going to create a situation that is not advantageous for your pelvic floor, your back, your abs, etc.